And originally I thought that I was going to leave the trains in there. Ow! Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. I have not forgot about my Panther platform supporters. I know I've been working on a lot of Mustangs recently, but I have not forgot about my Panther platforms. What I have here, I wish belonged to me, but it does not. This is a customer car. Occasionally I bring in some things that I know I can do, and I can do them fairly quickly to raise some money for some of the other projects that we have on the channel. So what we have is a 2009 Crown Vic. This is a police interceptor. It's got something going on internally with the engine. Seems like maybe the cam has jumped time, or maybe it had a broken timing chain. I'm not really sure. Somebody diagnosed it long before it got to me. But the owner of the vehicle has purchased a used engine to put in here in place of this damaged engine. So I've got to get this engine out. I'm going to leave the transmission attached just because I feel like it's going to be easier to get that out and get the new engine aligned on the transmission on the floor versus trying to have that engine dangling in here and getting the transmission to align perfectly. The torque converter and all that stuff on the flex plate to line up perfect is a lot easier to do on the floor versus in the car. So everything that I've done to this point has been kind of boring, but I'll bring you guys over here and show you where I'm at. To make pulling the engine a lot easier in this car, especially with the transmission attached, this whole cowl section with the wipers and the wiper motor and all that comes out in two pieces. And it's super simple to do. You just get the wiper arms off, and then there's a bunch of 10mm, 8mm bolts and stuff that hold it together. It comes off, and you really clear up a lot of the room in here. Now, I've gone ahead and removed the intake manifold, and I've gotten all my vacuum lines, the fuel line, all of the coolant hoses except for one heater hose are done. All of the stuff off the front of the engine, your power steering pump, and the AC compressor, they're laid off to the side. I went ahead and removed the fan and got that out of the way also. I'm going to move this reservoir over because I don't like the way it's laying against the radiator. But everything is off the front of the engine. The engine is actually unbolted from the K-member, or the suspension cross member. And then all of the exhaust is off of the engine as well. From here, all I really need to do, like I said, is get that drive shaft loose, get the transmission loose from the cross member, and then this thing will be ready to go. So what I will do is bolt an engine leveler up here on where the cylinder heads where the intake manifold would go, and then that's going to allow me to get in here with a cherry picker and pull this engine up, move it forward, tilt it back, and get it out of the car. I will need to set this hood up almost completely vertical just to make that extra room for the arm that's going to come in up here to the engine leveler. This is everything that I have removed so far to get to this point. Like I said, this is the cowl with the wipers in it. I went ahead and removed the intake elbow, the intake manifold, the alternator, all the coils, thermostat housing, coolant overflow, the fan, the air filter housing, and the mass air meter. So this pile of parts is pretty much everything except for the exhaust pipes, which are still over there under the car, and I'm not really worried about those. But this is everything that I feel like needs to come off in order to get this thing out of the car.
So these two lines right here are the hard lines. They follow the engine back to the transmission. They're actually bolted on little brackets in a couple of places, like one up here on the AC compressor. There's another one on the side by the motor mount. And then they just follow along back to the trans. So I've got those two soft lines disconnected from the hard lines. Again, the engine leveler is hooked up. I have nothing else connecting this engine to the car except for that heater hose, which I'll pop it off. Not super worried about that. I just want to let that cooling system drain out. That's it. I'm ready to hook up the cherry picker and then pull this engine up and out of here with the transmission attached. I set up the 1-ton Harbor Freight engine hoist just to show you guys why this is not going to work. I really need to get a 2-ton in here. That's going to be the only way this is going to work. This hoist may work on some other vehicles. It just doesn't have the reach to get in here to a rear-wheel drive vehicle that the engine is set back as far as this one is. I've used this around the house to pull bushes and a couple other things, but I've never used it to pull an engine. I've used it to set engines on stands, but never actually pull one out of a car. So, lesson learned, this is not going to work for what I need it to. I really need to get the 2-ton. I need it to come in another foot. What's happening is as I start to try to lift the engine up, it's tightening the rear chain and it's pulling the hoist towards the engine. And the reason that is basic geometry. We're lifting from the center point of this. It needs to be in the center point of the engine, or at least the leveler that I have in here. So until it gets to that point where it's directly over top, it's not going to lift it. The second problem that I'm going to run into with this setup, I need to prop this hood up and get it to where it's almost vertical. That way, once I do have that correct hoist in here, I can pull this engine up, I can angle it back down, and then pull it up and out of the engine bay. The length of the transmission attached to the engine is going to affect a lot of things in here. I still have a lot of hoses and stuff that I need to work around, so it's going to be a lot of fun. I don't have a lot of room back here behind the hoist, and hopefully I've got enough room where I won't need to actually set this down, move it further back in the garage, get it back up in the air, and then give myself the room. What I did is moved out the 95 GTS so that I will have room to swing the engine up, out, get it on the ground, put the core off to the side, and get that new engine attached to the trans. So I've got room to work over here behind me, and of course you can see the 93 Fober over there that's next in line once this thing is gone. I'm going to go gather up that hoist. I'm going to borrow from my neighbor and then get back to work on this thing as fast as I possibly can. So I had to wind up taking the cross member out in order to get the engine out. Basically, this cross member sits up here in the frame, and I had to pry against this tab right here, against this tab right here on that cross member. Once you work it down far enough, you can get a pry bar or screwdriver or something in these holes, work it down the rest of the way. Now, word of caution, this is heavy. If you do not have the engine supported like I do, you're going to be working against the weight of the transmission. The engine, it's going to want to tilt back on you once you get that loose. So do not lay underneath of this while you're taking it out. This is an absolute monster of a job. I mean, you can tell I'm shaking. I'm out of breath. This thing beat me up pretty bad. So I'm going to take a break and get topside. Finally, I think we're ready to get this thing out of here. So that cross member is off. The engine's fully supported by the hoist and the leveler. I'm going to put this up on the tripod so I can get to work. Basically, what needs to happen now, I need to adjust this engine to pitch towards the rear, or the front upward, the back towards the rear. Now that I have enough room for the transmission to move below where the cross member mounts, this whole thing should just kind of tilt up and come straight out of the engine bay. I think the biggest problem I have is once it's up here in the air, I'm going to have to manipulate the leveler in order to get it up and over top of the header panel here. So that's going to take a little bit of love and work and a lot of fun. I'm out here by myself, so I'm See if I can wrangle up some help to maybe get this thing knocked out. Sometimes, no matter what you do, you just wind up with a failure and a mess. See the trans fluid dripping out of the plug that I had jammed up into the tail shaft with a bag around it so that if it did leak out, it wouldn't come out of the bag. Well, apparently I bounced it off of something down there and broke the bag, and then proceeded to knock the plug out, which dumped about a gallon of the worst smelling trans fluid I've ever smelled onto the floor. So a blessing in disguise for this guy, because I'm gonna have to put trans fluid back in what was in there. You can see what's in the pan down there. Very, very dark, very burnt smelling. Supposedly he had the trans rebuilt 3 or 4 years ago. If so, I'd say it's probably very close to time for another rebuild, because that shouldn't be that dark and that nasty. So here we are, the joys of shade tree mechanicking. But I'm gonna get this leveled out the best that I can, and then we'll get this up and over the front of this car and get it out of here. This thing just keeps dropping fluid every time I touch it, but I think I have everything off that I'm going to need. Both exhaust manifolds, the motor mounts, water pump pulley, the tensioner, the idler, all that stuff is off the front of the motor. This water pump's going to stay. It does look new, but supposedly the engine that we're getting has 44,000 miles on it. I may go ahead and pull that pump and just tuck it off to the side, because I don't think they're going to need it on the core. They're probably just going to toss it. Got my wiring harness off. Up top here, the last thing I need to pull is just this heater hose tube that goes through the valley of the engine. And the wiring harness and all that stuff is laid off to the side now. I got the flex plate and the block plate off the back. So that's pretty much going to be it for this core engine. I'm going to mark this thing with some spray paint just so that I know which engine is which. You just never know. It's a lot easier to go ahead and mark it, and that way you know which one's the bad motor, just in case there's some sort of weird situation when I go to exchange this. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this heater hose, and hopefully the next thing that you guys see is the new engine hanging from the stand here. It's a little windy out, and I apologize, I don't have a good mic, so you'll hear a little bit of that. But this is our new engine for the 2009 Crown Vic engine swap car. This is for a customer vehicle. This is the LKQ engine that they've purchased, and LKQ stands for like, kind, and quality. Basically, it's a national database of recyclers. They know what engines fit. They know what parts fit. You can look up your closest LKQ yard. My preferred one, as you can see from this, happens to be Beards in Louisville. They do a really good job. The 351 engine for the 95 GTS came from the same place. And this engine is out of an 07 Lincoln Town Car, and supposedly has about 45,000 miles or so on it, which I believe that it does. There's nothing really alarming on the outside that I can see. You know, some of the things on these 4.6s that are noticeable is these exhaust manifold studs will break. You'll get an exhaust leak around there. I'm not seeing that. You know, I did see a couple of sensors, like this crank position sensors broke. We'll swap that over anyway. The cam position sensor up here, I'm going to swap that as well. And this oil cooler with the radiator hose adapter, that's going to get swapped out because the police Interceptor is a little different. It's got that oil pressure sending unit on it. Again, it's going to get moved. Over to the driver's side exhaust manifold, all the studs look good on it, so we'll be able to swap that right in. Our EGR tube is still attached. I'm not going to break that loose. They did send me the flywheel bolts, which is nice, but I'll reuse the ones that came off of the car. I got one bell housing boat with it, which is cool. But so one of the big things on the 4.6s that breaks, causes some issues, is this nipple that goes to the heater core. And you'll see evidence of it leaking back here. If it does leak, it'll actually go down into this number 4 plug hole, and it'll cause a misfire when it gets really bad. In this case, I don't see any evidence of leaks. Looks like it's in really good shape. We got a ground wire we'll have to swap over, again, no big deal. And then coming back to the backside of the exhaust manifold, it looks great. So this is going to be a good usable engine. And I've already talked to the yard about our core. Basically, we just send back the long block with none of this stuff on it. So I'm going to turn those parts over to the owner of the vehicle. That way he'll have an extra intake and extra exhaust manifolds. And then we're going to swap those other parts over and just toss them in the garbage. So I've gone ahead and removed the intake manifold, got everything ready to go to put the leveler on. I'm going to have to put that on in order to get the engine attached back to the trans. Before I got too far, some of these plug holes did have a little bit of water and debris in them, so I've blown those out, covered up the holes going into the cylinders. I went ahead and pulled the number 1 spark plug out of this engine, and it was much cleaner than the plug that I've got in my hand here, which was from the original engine. You can see there's a lot of soot and buildup and stuff on this one. And I went ahead and put that plug back in there. So I'm going to attach the leveler to the cylinder heads here and here, and you know, pretty much at all the 4 corners. Pick this up, get it on the trans. So I was able to find, I think this is a Felpro. It looks like it's in better shape. The O-rings and stuff are in better shape than the 2 that I pulled off. Of course, this is the original one. This is off of our used engine. So it's in good shape. We're going to go with this on the oil cooler and hopefully prevent any leaks in the future. I'm letting the oil cooler sit over here and run in the parts washer for a little bit. Just had a bunch of crud and dirt and stuff built up on it. It looks much better now than it did when I took it off, but I just want to make sure this is really good and clean. Again, we got oil and coolant mixing in this housing, not necessarily together, but they both go in this housing. And I want to make sure that this looks as good as it can. That way, if there is a leak in the future, it's easier to find out where it's coming from. All of the split loom was so dry and heat soaked that it was just crumbling when you touched it. I don't like that, and I want to protect the harness the best I can. Just whoever works on it in the future, you know, I don't want any wires exposed or possibly getting pinched while I'm putting this back together. So that stuff adds just a little layer of protection, and it just looks better when it's done. You know, I've got my name on this thing, so I want it to look pretty good. You know, I'm not expecting perfection, but it's going to be good enough.
I'm going to holler at the boys, have them come back out here and help me. We're going to get this up in the air, slide it back into the engine bay. I did go ahead and lower the car down to the next notch on my jack stands, which should give me about an inch of clearance. Last time we did touch the ceiling up there with the hoist. Hopefully lowering the car down will give us the extra room that we need where we won't hit the ceiling again. It's definitely going to take all three of us to get this thing back in there. My youngest is sick right now, so I don't know how much help he's going to be, but hopefully he can at least push or guide or lower the cylinder for us. So I'm going to get them out here, and then we'll get this thing set in. Well, the engine is now in the car. I'd like to say this only took one try, but it really took about 2 tries to get it in there. We had to fight a lot of different things. The angle going in fought us. The length on the hoist fought us. And then when we finally got everything situated where it wasn't up against the heater box and this vacuum reservoir, the AC compressor slid down between the cross member and the engine and prevented it from sitting back in there, so I had to lift it back up, move that out of the way, and now we're back in. I've gone ahead and put the cross member back in the car, which for those of you that have worked on the Panther platform, you know how much fun that is. I've mentioned that cross member is a nightmare, and I've got that back in now. You know, if Stiflers or somebody that was into aftermarket parts were to design a cross member for these vehicles, they would probably make a killing, something that's easier to get in and out than the one that's in there. I'm just saying, hey, you know, there's a lot of these frames wind up under F100s and stuff. That's an opportunity for aftermarket to step in and make something better. Huge shout out to the boys for coming out here and helping me last night and you know, a few weeks ago when we pulled this engine. They've been a huge help on projects like this where they can come out and really add 2 more sets of eyeballs and a couple extra sets of arms to muscle this thing back in. I wouldn't have been able to get this back in by myself. Even just one of them being out here wouldn't have been able to pull it off. So both of them came out, gave me a hand. My youngest, Colin, he's not feeling too good, so it was awesome for him to come out here and help us too. From here, I just need to go through and start buttoning everything up. I know this is turning into a very long video, and I'm going to try to time lapse as much of this stuff as I possibly can, but you know, this project is actually taking me almost 3 months to do. Not all of it was my fault. Some of it was just waiting on the engine, trying to figure out the logistics of getting the new engine here and getting the core back to them.
When I originally took on this project, I did mention that I needed that engine brought to me with the car. That was not the case. Somehow got lost in communication or something along the way. The engine didn't wind up out here with the car, so here we are. Other than that, and buttoning everything up, we're pretty much almost close. I mean, I hope that I can get this knocked out in the next couple weeks and get this back to the gentleman, because well, I've got another project coming in, another customer vehicle. You guys will probably be interested in this next one. I'm going to look at that tomorrow after work, just to make sure that my quote and everything is right on it. But if we get that one, it's going to be a pretty cool vehicle. If not, I'll explain it in a video somewhere down the line. All right, enough talking. I'm going to get back to work. Well, I've got my Matco hood prop over here, so the Fox Body cargo cover hood prop has moved. I've got a lot done under the hood here. The intake manifold is on. My wiring harness is routed for a majority of what needs to be done for now. I've got all of the coils, the injectors, all that's hooked up. Still need to make my connection to the PCM and the body harness over here, but I wanted to leave that loose so that I had some slack in the harness. Most of the sensors on the engine are hooked up. Air compressor is back on. Power steering pump is on. I still need to get my installer to get the power steering pulley back onto the pump. I've got my lower radiator hose on. I'm going to throw the upper hose on next, and then get the heater hoses in and get the reservoir in, because I'm going to put a vacuum on this cooling system and check for any kind of leaks that may be in the system. Also, with the vacuum, it allows you to get all of the air out and put coolant into the engine, the radiator, the heater core, and eliminate any kind of air pockets in the system. It's not 100% effective. I mean, I'm sure there's still going to be some air somewhere, but the main reason that I'm doing that is to avoid spilling a bunch of coolant on the ground, causing a huge mess and more time and trouble trying to chase down a leak or something. So for now, I feel like I've got a lot accomplished today. I've got to go get cleaned up. We're doing a Thanksgiving dinner at my family's tonight. So this is a good stopping point. You know, I can't thank you guys enough for making it this far into the video. Hang out, because I'm going to do more work on this vehicle, and you will see this vehicle run in this video. So I know it's a long video, and we're not even all the way to the end yet, but hang in there. We're going to get there. We're sitting at about 11 and a half to 12. Not really PSI, but that's inches of mercury. So 12 inches of vacuum on the system. I'm going to call that pretty good. From the time I've got you guys off of the tripod, brought you over, got everything kind of squared away, it's been about 5 minutes or so now since I originally put the vacuum on the system. You can see, like I pointed at the hose, how it sucks down the hoses. The lower radiator hose down there is compressed. The ones back here for the heater hose, they didn't really compress too much, which is a good thing. But up here, we're holding vacuum. So I'm going to call that, a win. I don't think we have any leaks in the system. Now, before I go to fill the system up, I'll do this again. I'll have that clean bucket of coolant ready to go, and we'll drop this in. When you do that, I can open this valve right here. It'll suck the coolant up through this hose, straight through the reservoir and into the cooling system, which will be very, very nice. We should have no air pockets or very little air in the system after we do this, in theory, but we'll find out. Progress, and in between the last clip I've got the air filter housing, some of my vacuum lines. I'm pretty much at a dead standstill until I can get that power steering pulley back on the engine. So I'm going to run to AutoZone and O'Reilly's or someplace, pick up the tool that I need to get that back on, and then I'll pick back up once I'm done too. I've got the installer started onto the power steering pump. This is really tough to do. The thing I like about my snap-on version of this is it seems like it goes on a lot easier. This one, it takes a lot of effort to, basically you're shoving the pulley back onto the shaft of the power steering pump. So my snap-on version takes a lot less effort. This one that I rented from O'Reilly's, I mean, it's getting the job done with the help of a Craftsman socket in there, but it's not easy. It takes a lot out of me. I can only get a couple of turns on this thing before I have to take a breath, take a break. I've still got maybe a quarter of an inch to go before it's tightened down. This guy's gonna need a belt before too long. There's a little bit of cracks and stuff on it, but unfortunately I'm gonna have to just kind of power through and get this thing done. He called me last night, and someone totaled out his other vehicle, and he's got to get this thing back on the road and get back to making some money with it. So I've got to get to work, and this thing, this part of it is probably one of the most difficult parts, is dealing with this power steering pump. But it's nearly impossible to get the pump off of the block without removing the pulley. It just, this tool's not the best to use, so we'll work through it. I'll get this thing on here. Really don't have a choice. I got to get it done. So I've got a 9/16 wrench that I'm basically holding the shaft with, and then using this 11/16 to turn the installer, which shoves a pulley on. That's about all I can get, is about a turn and a half. It's just, it takes a lot of pressure. I'm keeping an eye on this socket because I don't want it to deform, or, you know, it's not a hardened steel socket, it's just a chrome socket. But applying a lateral force to it should be okay. And part of the other problem I'm having is, well, it's 25 degrees outside today with an inch of snow on the ground. The shop was right at 40 degrees when I came out here. So I've got both heaters running again today. Smells a little bit like propane. And the valve's off on the tank now. Yeah. Woo! That was nerve-wracking just for a second. Yes. All right. Man, it sounds good too. She's idling down. Heck yes. Yes. You guys don't understand how happy I am to get this thing back together. All right. I am going to put coolant in, get that system topped up, put the bumper back on, the headlights back on, clean up this engine bay, get my cowl panel back on, um, and then once I make sure it goes into gear and everything sounds good there, um, we'll take it out for a drive, just up and down the road here. It may be hard to tell from the mic, but this engine's running like a sewing machine. I mean, it's just as smooth as can be. We're up to temp. Upper radiator hose is warm. I've been checking my coolant reservoir every so often, just letting any air that may have captured in that reservoir out. Heater hoses are hot. In fact, the interior is so warm I can't even sit in there. I'm out here in the garage. I've got the heater going. It's like 25 degrees outside, which is unusual for Kentucky, but we'll deal with it. The heat is working so well in there, I can't even hold my hand in front of the vents. It's just blowing hot air out so strong. But everything's working like it should. Really happy with the process. I feel like this could have gone smoother in some points. Trying to fiddle around with not pulling that cross member out probably cost me a few days worth of work. Just a few things that I ran into issues with here and there cost me some time, but for the most part, this went very well. Going back together, went very fast, which is what I'd hoped for. Which is kind of why I wanted the engine brought out here to me. It took me a couple of weeks worth of organizing and orchestrating and everything to get that engine out here. So, start to finish, we're now 3 months in. I started this on September the 2nd, or September the 4th, and it's December the 2nd as of today. So, we're 3 months in. Again, not ideal. Definitely not going to pay the bills enough to do this full time. So, it kind of remains as a hobby for me. I don't work very fast. That's why I'm not a mechanic. Part of that is just due to my perfectionist nature. The other part is I've got carpal tunnel like really bad, so I can't wrench for more than a few minutes before I lose feeling in my hands. All that aside, I'm really happy with the way this went. It went really good. Again, it could have got a lot worse. The boys really stepped up and helped me get this engine out and get the new engine back in. That was a huge help. So I can't thank them enough for coming out here and helping Dad work on this thing. If this is the kind of stuff that you guys like to watch, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the like on the video. Let me know that you really thought this was something cool. It's not often I get to work on a Panther platform anymore, but we still have a Lincoln that needs to be put back together. Still waiting on we'll call it a competent frame shop to figure out what's going on with the frame on that car so that I can put it back together and get it back on the road. This has opened my eyes to a couple of things. I'm going to start looking for maybe a police interceptor or a Crown Vic Sport. Something, this is a big, comfortable car. It's nice to drive. I don't have to go back and forth to Louisville every day for work, which is about an hour away. My new job is much closer, so I could get something like this and not really have to sweat going through too much traffic with it. Yeah, that's a wrap for this project. We're going to get this back to the owner and get some more use back out of this car. So, again, if you like watching stuff like this, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought of this project. I'm open to all opinions. I'm definitely not an expert by any means. I always like to hear new opinions and new ideas when it comes to working on these cars. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and remember to stay loved up.